The darkness in the cargo hold was not simply an absence of light. It was a physical weight that pressed against our eyelids and filled our lungs like thick water. We were packed so tightly that the heat of 1,000 bodies created a suffocating, humid haze, yet the chill of the void seeped through the hole, freezing the sweat on our skin. There was no room to lie down properly, so we huddled in a mass of limbs and rags, a sea of frightened breathing and suppressed whimpers. Every few minutes, the ship would groan a deep tectonic shudder that traveled up through the soles of my bare feet and rattled my teeth. It was the sound of a beast digesting its meal. We were that meal. We were not passengers. We were not even prisoners. We were currency. The tithe. I closed my eyes, though it made no difference in the gloom, and focused entirely on the stone in my right hand. I ran my thumb over its surface, counting the imperfections, memorizing the curve of its edge. It was cool and solid, a fragment of a world that was light years behind us, a world I would never see again. The texture was my anchor. If I let go even for a second, I felt I would dissolve into the mass of weeping children around me. The fear wasn't sharp anymore. It had become a dull, constant ache in the stomach like hunger. I wondered if my mother was looking at the sky, wondering where I had gone. Or perhaps she was just relieved that the black ships had taken me and spared the rest of them. That is the nature of the tithe. It buys safety for those left behind. A sound cut through the low murmur of the hold, the heavy metallic clanking of a hatch unsealing high above us. A beam of harsh artificial light sliced down, blinding and violent, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. We all flinched, a collective recoil like a wounded animal. Then came the boots. The guards didn't walk. They stomped with the authority of those who hold life and death in their hands. They wore masks that hid their faces, turning them into faceless automatons of the Imperium. They walked on the catwalks above, looking down at us through the grate. I stopped breathing. I stopped moving. I became a statue, praying to the God Emperor that their gaze would not settle on me. To be noticed was to be in danger. In the dark, anonymity was our only armor. Silence. A voice boomed, amplified by a voxcaster until it distorted into a growl. Silence, cargo. Or receive the blessing of the purge. The voice was devoid of humanity. It was the voice of the machine of the system that had collected us. Beside me, a young boy, no older than 5, let out a sob that he couldn't stifle. It was a small sound, barely a whisper, but in the sudden quiet, it echoed like a gunshot. I felt the air pressure change as a guard stopped on the walkway directly above us. The barrel of a weapon poked through the grate. I squeezed my stone so hard I thought it would crack. I wanted to reach out to cover the boy's mouth to save him, but I didn't. I sat, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. You think you would be a hero. You think you would stand up. But you wouldn't. You would sit there and pray it wasn't you. The moment passed. The guard moved on the heavy footsteps, fading into the rhythmic thrum of the engines. The boy continued to weep softer, now muffled against his knees. I exhaled a long, trembling breath that tasted of recycled air and fear. Shame washed over me, hot and prickling. I had traded his safety for my own invisibility. I was already learning the first lesson of the Scholastia: empathy is a liability. Survival requires a hardness that I didn't want to possess. I brought the stone to my lips, tasting the faint phantom salt of the river. It was a secret rebellion. As long as I held this stone, I was Alara. I was not just a number on a manifest. I was a person who remembered the sun. Time lost its meaning in the belly of the ship. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. There was no day or night, only the cycle of the lights dimming and brightening, and the infrequent arrival of nutrient paste that tasted like wet cardboard. We slept in shifts, leaning against strangers, our dreams haunted by the warp shadows that whispered just outside the hull. Sometimes, people just stopped moving. They didn't scream or thrash. They just quietly slipped away, their souls extinguished by the proximity to the void. When that happened, the guards would come. They would drag the body away with efficient indifference, and the crowd would shuffle to fill the empty space. The warmth of the person was gone, replaced immediately by the cold encroachment of the ship. Then the vibration changed. The constant low-frequency hum of the warp drive shifted into a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. Gravity lurched, pulling us down heavy and undeniable. The air pressure spiked, popping in my ears. We were decelerating. We were descending. The whispers among the older children started Terra, the throne world, the center of humanity. We were told it was a paradise, a golden city where the Emperor walked. But as the ship groaned and the landing thrusters fired, shaking the hull with violent tremors, I didn't feel like I was approaching paradise. I felt like I was falling into the throat of a monster. I put the stone in my mouth, hiding it under my tongue. It was a choking hazard, a foolish risk, but I couldn't hold it in my hand anymore. They would take it. And if they took it, they took me. The final landing was a collision. The ship slammed into the cradle, throwing us all forward in a heap of tangled limbs. Then, the hiss of hydraulics. The great main cargo doors began to grind open. Light, real, blinding, unfiltered light flooded the hold, searing our eyes after weeks of gloom. It wasn't the golden light of salvation. It was the harsh, white glare of a processing facility. The smell of ozone and incense rolled in, overpowering the stench of the hold. A voice louder than the Voxcaster echoed from outside. "Unload the tithe. Process them." I swallowed the urge to gag on the stone. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked into the light. The journey in the dark was over. The nightmare in the light was about to begin. It wasn't mercy. It was just the next stage of the assembly line. The Scholastia Psychana did not look like a school. It looked like a mausoleum built for giants. The ceiling was lost in shadows high above, supported by pillars of dark iron that seemed to weep oil. The air here was different from the ship. It was sterile, smelling of sharp chemical cleaners and the underlying coppery tang of old blood that no amount of scrubbing could erase. We were herded into a vast open chamber, thousands of us, a sea of shivering, dirty bodies. The floor was cold stone, polished smooth by the feet of millions who had come before us and never left. I kept my mouth shut tight. The riverstone was under my tongue, a hard, uncomfortable lump. It tasted of salt and the metal of the ship, but it was the only secret I had left. If I opened my mouth to speak, they would see it. If I spoke, I would lose it. So I became mute. Silence is the first language you learn here. The processing was a disassembly line. We were not children to them. We were raw components, flawed and dirty, in need of stripping down. Remove the rags, the Vox drones blared their voices, overlapping in a disorienting echo. Burn the past. We stripped. I dropped my tunic, the last thing my mother had woven for me. It hit the floor with a soft rustle, joining a pile of other discarded lives. I stood naked, shivering not just from the cold, but from the exposure. There is a specific kind of shame in being naked in a crowd of strangers, but that shame quickly turns to a dull numbness. You stop looking at others. You stop looking at yourself. You become just another piece of pale meat waiting for the butcher. Then came the clippers. The servitors moved down the lines with mechanical efficiency, their metal limbs whirring. I felt the cold steel press against my scalp, vibrating against my skull. There was no gentleness, only function. Tufts of my hair fell to the floor, dark locks that had once been brushed by a loving hand. Now they were just refuse, swept away by automated drones. I watched the hair pile up around my bare feet. With every lock that fell, a piece of Alara fell with it. I ran a hand over my head. It was stubble. Rough. Alien. I looked to my left. The girl beside me, she had been pretty on the ship with long golden braids, was now just a pale, frightened skull. We were all the same now. The unique shapes of us were being filed down. A boy 3 rows ahead made a mistake. He started to cry. He started to scream for his father. It was a piercing sound that shattered the rhythmic buzz of the clippers. He tried to run a frantic, scrabbling dash across the polished stone. He didn't get far. A proctor, a towering figure in crimson robes and augmentations, moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so heavy. There was a wet thud. Not a crack, but a thud, like a heavy sack of grain hitting the earth. The boy stopped screaming. He didn't get up. The line didn't stop. The servitors didn't pause. We just shuffled forward, stepping around the heap on the floor. The lesson was immediate and absolute. Obedience is survival. Defiance is a wet thud on cold stone. I clamped my jaw tighter around the stone in my mouth until my teeth ached. We reached the branding stations. The smell hit me first. Sweet, sickly smoke. It was the smell of cooking pork. My stomach turned heaving against the emptiness inside it, but I forced it down. I held out my wrist as instructed. The servitor's claw clamped down, holding my arm in a vice grip. The iron descended. It glowed an angry cherry red. I didn't look away. I wanted to, but I couldn't. The metal met my skin with a hiss that sounded like a serpent. The pain was white and sharp, shooting up my arm and exploding behind my eyes. I wanted to scream. I needed to scream. But the stone was there. I bit down on it, grinding my teeth against the granite. The scream died in my throat, strangled by the rock. When the iron lifted, the skin was gone. In its place was a charred, angry number. 751. The final shackle was the collar. It was a heavy black metal ring, cold as the void. A tech priest fitted it around my neck, his mechatendrites tightening the bolts with precise, agonizing twists. As it locked into place, I felt a sudden, terrifying emptiness. It was as if a door in my mind had been slammed shut. The faint, buzzing static of the warp that I had always heard in the back of my head, the gift that had brought me here, was suddenly cut off. It was a psychic dampener. It didn't just restrain me, it blinded my soul. I gasped, clawing at the metal, but it was seamless. Do not touch the dampener. The priest rasped his voice a dry rattle. It is the only thing keeping the demons from wearing your skin. They finished us with the blindfolds. Thick, heavy weave wrapped tight over our eyes and sealed at the back. The world of gray stone and crimson robes vanished, replaced by a suffocating, absolute black. This wasn't the darkness of the ship. This was a forced night. I stood there shivering, bald, branded, collared, and blind. I rolled the stone over my tongue, feeling its smooth surface. It was the only thing that felt real. I repeated the number in my head. 791. 791. But beneath it I whispered the truth to the darkness inside my mouth. Ilara. My name is Ilara. The cell door slammed shut. The silence stayed. Time died in that box. I tried to keep it alive at first. I counted my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, until I reached 1,000. Then I counted my breaths, but the numbers grew slippery. They dissolved in the dark, like sugar in hot water. Was I in there for a day, a week, a lifetime? There was no light, no sound, no temperature change. Just the damp, stagnant air and the beating of my own pulse, which sounded like a drum in the silence. The cell was small. I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. I spent hours just tracing the grout lines between the stones, mapping a world that consisted of 3 square meters. It was the only geography I had left. My mind began to eat itself. That is what they want, of course. The isolation isn't a punishment, it's a catalyst. When the eyes see nothing, the brain tries to fill the void. I started to hear things. At first it was just a low hum like a generator far below the earth. Then it became voices. I heard my mother calling me for dinner. I heard the splash of the river. I heard the guard from the ship laughing. I whispered back to them. "I'm here," I said to the dark. "I'm still here." But my voice sounded flat and dead, absorbed instantly by the damp stone. I took the river stone from my mouth. My spit had made it warm. I rubbed it against my cheek, desperate for a touch that wasn't cold masonry. I was forgetting what the sun felt like. I was forgetting the color of the sky. Then came the fear. Not the sharp adrenaline fear of the branding iron, but a slow, creeping rot. The walls felt like they were moving. I pressed my hands against them, and the stone felt soft, like flesh. I pulled back, gasping, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness seemed to have weight now pressing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I curled into the corner, rocking back and forth. "My name is Ilara," I whispered. "My name is Ilara." But the words felt hollow, like a spell that had lost its power. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. It was watching. It started with a smell. Sharp, metallic, like the air before a thunderstorm, but 1,000 times stronger. Ozone. It tasted like copper on the back of my tongue. I gagged, clutching my throat. The air in the cell grew heavy, charged with static. The hairs on my arms stood up. And then I saw it. I was blindfolded in a pitch-black room, but I saw it. A flash of white light, jagged and violent, exploded behind my eyes. It wasn't a vision of the future or a message from angels. It was a scream made of light. I saw a face, twisted, melting mouth open in an endless howl flash in the dark for a fraction of a second. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore out of me, raw and animalistic. I clawed at the blindfold, but my hands wouldn't work properly. The ozone smell was suffocating. My head felt like it was being split open by a wedge. "Get it out!" I shrieked. "Get it out!" The vision was gone, but the afterimage burned in my mind, a scar of pure brightness. The heavy iron door of the cell groaned open. Light from the corridor spilled in, but it seemed dim compared to the fire that had just erupted in my skull. 2 figures stood in the doorway, silhouettes against the gray light. "Subject 771, a voice said. It wasn't angry. It was bored. Manifestation confirmed. Grade Epsilon. Move her to the gauntlet. Strong hands grabbed me, hauling me up from the floor. My legs were useless, numb from days of crouching. I dragged my feet, my head lolling. I could still smell the ozone. I could still feel the heat of that flash. They thought I had passed a test. They thought I had unlocked a gift. But I knew the truth as they dragged me into the hallway. It wasn't a light. It was a fire, and it was inside me. The training hall was vast, a cavern of cold iron and recycled air, but it smelled like a crematorium. The scent hung heavy in the still air, scorched hair, burning dust, and the unmistakable copper tang of cooked meat. We stood in perfect rows, hundreds of us blindfolded and shivering. We were no longer children. We were batteries waiting to be tested. The only sound in the immense chamber was the rhythmic, mechanical stride of the proctor. Click, click, click. His legs were augmetics, steel pistons that struck the floor with the precision of a metronome. Every time that clicking stopped, someone died. He moved down the line, a shark patrolling a reef of soft flesh. Click, click, stop. I could hear the ragged breathing of the boy 3 spots to my left. I felt the air pressure drop as the proctor focused his will. Open the proctor's voice, grated, amplified, and metallic. "Let the warp in, then deny it!" The boy whimpered. I felt the static charge build a prickly heat, that made the hair on my arms stand up. The boy was trying. I could feel his mind flailing, panic overriding discipline. He was opening the door, but he didn't know how to close it. Then came the sound. It wasn't a scream, it was worse. It was a wet, bubbling gurgle followed by a sharp pop, like a piece of fruit being crushed under a boot. The psychic pressure in the room vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden sickening heat. Something wet splattered across the floor, droplets hitting my bare foot. The smell was instantaneous, hot iron-rich blood and seared brain matter. I squeezed my eyes shut beneath the blindfold, my stomach heaving. Aspirant 734, the proctor droned indifferent. Failure to shield. Cerebral rupture. Remove it. The servitors dragged the body away. The boot scraped against the stone. Click. 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 The lesson resumed. He stopped in front of me. I felt the cold radiation of his augmetics against my skin. Aspirant 71, he said. Open. The command hit me like a physical blow. A needle of invisible pressure bore into my temple. The panic rose a black tide, threatening to drown me. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream like the boy. But I remembered the sound of the pop. I remembered the smell. No, I thought of my river stone. I visualized it in the center of my mind. Cold, smooth, unyielding. I built a river around it. I imagined the freezing water of my homeworld rushing through my head, a wall of ice-cold current that nothing could burn through. The pressure increased a drill trying to pierce the ice. I held the image. The water roared in my ears, drowning out the fear, drowning out the memory of the boy's death. I was not Alara. I was the river. I was the stone. After an eternity, the pressure vanished. Adequate, the proctor muttered. Barely. The clicking footsteps moved on. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was alive. The boy was dead. And as the drag marks of his body dried on the floor, I realized the terrible truth of the Scholastia compassion is a weakness. To survive, I had to step over the dead. In the Scholastia, failure isn't a grade. It's a death sentence. And every day the class size got smaller. They marched us into the cloisters, a room that smelled of electrified copper and old sweat. It was filled with rows of iron chairs, each equipped with restraints, and a halo of wires that descended from the ceiling like the webs of mechanical spiders. We didn't sit. We were installed. The servitors strapped my wrists and ankles with leather belts that had been stiffened by the perspiration of 1,000 aspirants before me. Then came the interface. Cold, needle-thin probes pressed against the base of my skull and my temples. They hummed with a low, nauseating vibration. The proctor walked the aisle, his voice devoid of comfort. "You have learned to be a wall," he said. "Now you must learn to be a door, but only a crack. Open too wide and the storm will tear the house apart." The machine activated. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation of falling, a sudden violent vertigo that turned my stomach inside out. The physical world, the chair, the straps, the cold air receded, replaced by a roaring gray static. It was the warp. It wasn't empty space. It was a crowded room where everyone was screaming at once. Rage, fear, lust, despair. It hit me like a physical wave washing over the mental dam I had built. I gagged, tasting bile. It was too loud. It was a cacophony of 1 billion souls shouting into the void. I tried to pull back to hide behind my riverstone, but the wires held my mind open. Focus, the proctor's voice cut through the noise, sharp and artificial. Find the signal. Ignore the static. Listen for the intent. I forced myself to stop fighting the wave and instead tread water within it. I searched the chaos for a thread, a pattern. Amidst the roaring ocean of senseless emotion, I felt a sharp, stinging sensation. It wasn't a voice. It was pain. Distinct, sharp, physical pain. I focused on it. The world dissolved into a flash of white agony. I felt a snap in my shin. I felt the grinding of bone against bone. I felt the hot rush of blood filling a boot. It wasn't my leg, but the nerves in my brain fired as if it were. I gasped, arching my back against the restraints, a hiss of air escaping my teeth. The data followed the pain blooming in my mind, like a bruise. Sector 3, Cohort. 7, Ambush. Report, the proctor demanded. My voice was a croak, dry and trembling. Sector 3. I managed to whisper the phantom pain in my leg, making me sweat. Cohort 7, Casualties, requesting extraction. The proctor didn't praise me. He simply clicked a rune on his data slate. Correct, he said coldly. You felt the bone break, didn't you? Good. Remember that. Joy is fleeting. Hope is quiet. But pain screams. Pain is the most reliable carrier wave in the galaxy. The connection severed, and I slumped in the chair panting. My leg was whole, but the memory of the break was etched into my marrow. I had heard my first message, but to hear it I had to feel another man's bones shatter. I was learning to be a receiver for the Imperium's agony. The combat cells were smaller than the dorms, suffocating stone boxes that smelled of old sweat and sharp, acrid ozone. They paired us off. My opponent was number 840, a pale, shivering boy with bitten fingernails, who I had seen weeping in the mess hall. We stood 10 paces apart, blindfolded. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel him. I could feel his terror vibrating in the air like heat rising from pavement. The proctor stood between us, a shadow of judgment. Begin, he ordered. Shield or break. Orty struck first. It wasn't a refined strike. It was a clumsy shove of raw psychic force, like a fist made of static. It slammed into my mind, a headache blooming instantly behind my eyes. I staggered back, my feet scuffing the stone. Panic flared, but I smothered it. I reached for the image of my river stone. I visualized it growing, expanding until it was a boulder, then a wall, then a fortress of cold, wet granite. His attack crashed against it and dissipated. I felt his frustration, his rising panic, as his power harmlessly washed over my mental ramparts. I was safe behind the stone. I was the stone. Insufficient, 771. The proctor's voice cut through the air, bored and dangerous. Defense is not victory. Attack, now! I froze. I had spent weeks learning to hide, to build walls, to be invisible. I didn't know how to hurt. Now the proctor roared. The fear spiked in me. The fear of the rod, the fear of the cell, the fear of the dark. I didn't have technique. I only had terror. So I took all of it. The suffocating blackness of the cargo hold, the cold metal of the collar, the loneliness of the box, and I pushed it outward. I didn't throw a punch. I threw my nightmare at him. I felt the contact. It was sickeningly intimate. For a split second, my mind touched his without barriers. I felt him. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a frightened child. I saw a flash of his memory, a blue rag doll with one button eye clutching it in the dark. Then my fear washed over him. I felt his shield shatter like thin glass. There was a sound, not in the room, but in my head, a wet, soft pop. The resistance vanished. 840 fell to his knees. Then he started to laugh. It was a high, empty giggle, a sound devoid of humor or sanity. He rocked back and forth, laughing at nothing, his mind fractured into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Aspirant 840, mind broken. The proctor announced, his voice flat. Failure. Remove him to the corpse starchers. He turned his unseen gaze to me. Aspirant 701. Pass. You have a vicious mind. Cultivate it. I stood trembling as the servitors dragged the giggling boy away. I tried to feel triumph. I tried to feel safe. But all I could see was the image of that blue doll floating in the wreckage of the mind I had just destroyed. I passed. He didn't. That was the only math that mattered. I was becoming the monster I feared. The night before the end, they moved us to the sanctum. It was a place of blinding, aggressive whiteness. The walls were white marble, the floors were white tile, and the lights were harsh, shadowless strips that eliminated the concept of corners. It smelled of nothing. Not the ozone of the cells, not the sweat of the gym, not the rot of the ship. It smelled of a vacuum. They stripped us one last time. This was not the rough processing of the induction. This was a ritual. Servitors bathed us in freezing chemical water that stung our abrasions and numbed our skin. They scrubbed us until we were raw, scraping away the grime of the training halls, the dried blood of our failures, and the scent of our own fear. We were being prepared. Not like soldiers, but like sacrifices. We stood in a circle, shivering in the sterile chill, wearing simple white robes that felt like paper against our skin. A priest moved among us. He did not carry a weapon, but a censer of silver that trailed a thin, suffocating smoke. He stopped before each of us, his eyes hidden behind a veil of gold mesh. To be filled with the Emperor, he intoned his voice deep and resonant. One must first be empty. Do you harbor any relics of the self? Do you cling to the dust of your past? He wasn't asking about contraband. He was asking about our souls. He was asking if we were still people. My hand was a fist at my side, hidden in the folds of the robe. Inside it, the river stone was warm. It had absorbed my body heat for months. It was the only part of me that hadn't changed. It was the river. It was the sky. It was the girl who used to run through the tall grass. If I gave it up, that girl died. If I kept it, would I burn? Would the Emperor see my attachment as a flaw and incinerate me where I stood? The priest stopped in front of me. The smoke curled around my face, smelling of burnt herbs and ash. He didn't speak. He just held out a gaunt, open hand. He waited. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at the white wall behind him. There was nothing there. No future. No past. Just the duty. Slowly, with a trembling that shook my entire arm, I uncurled my fingers. The stone sat there, gray and unassuming, a piece of dirt in a holy place. The priest didn't look at it. He simply took it. He turned to a bronze brazier burning in the center of the room and tossed it in. I waited for a magical flare, a sign of protest from the universe. But there was only a dull clack as the stone hit the metal grate, followed by the hiss of the fire licking at the rock. That was it. My history, my name, my home discarded like trash. I am empty, I whispered. The words tasted like ash. The priest nodded and moved on to the next aspirant. I stood there, my hand still open, feeling the air touch the palm where the stone had been. It felt cold. It felt vast. I was no longer Ilara Vex, the girl with the stone. I was a vessel. I was a hollow reed waiting for the wind. But as the bell tolled the hour signaling the approach of dawn, I didn't feel holy. We were told we were going to meet our God. But we walked to the chamber, like prisoners walking to the gallows. The walk was a funeral procession in the dark. We were blindfolded again, a single hand resting on the shoulder of the aspirant. In front, a chain of trembling bodies, moving blindly into the deep earth. The air in the hallway didn't move. It vibrated. It grew thicker with every step, heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient dust, tasting like battery acid on the tongue. This wasn't just atmosphere, it was radiation. We were walking into the heart of a star. My hair stood on end, crackling against the fabric of my cowl. My skin prickled as if 1,000 insects were crawling beneath the surface. The silence of the sanctum was gone, replaced by a low, thrumming vibration that I felt in my teeth before I heard it with my ears. It was the sound of power. Immense, uncontained, terrifying power. Then the great adamantium gates ground open. The sound hit us like a physical blow, a wall of wind that nearly knocked me off my feet. It wasn't a chant. It wasn't a machine. It was a roar. Imagine a stadium filled with people screaming in agony, then multiply that by 1,000,000, then amplify it until the air itself bleeds. That was the sound of the Golden Throne. It was the psychic scream of 1,000,000,000 souls being fed to the fire, a choir of the damned singing to a dying god. The pressure was unbearable. It felt like gravity had increased tenfold. My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, gasping, the stones scraping my palms. We all fell. To stand in that presence was an insult. To stand was impossible. Somewhere ahead of me, a girl began to shriek. "It's too bright. It's too loud." Her voice was thin, a reed snapping in a hurricane. I felt the pressure spike, a sudden surge of golden heat that smelled of burnt sugar. Then came the sound I remembered from the training hall, a wet, heavy pop. Her screaming stopped instantly. There was a heavy thud as a body hit the floor, limp and useless. She hadn't been attacked. She hadn't failed a test. She had simply ceased to exist because she was too fragile to be this close to the sun. A servitor dragged her remains away, the scraping of boots lost in the roar. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor, curling into a ball. "Please," I whispered to the roaring dark. "I am empty. I am nothing. Don't look at me. Please don't look at me." One of us died just from approaching the chamber. The rest of us, we were about to wish for such an easy death. The blindfold didn't fall away. It simply ceased to exist. In an instant, the fabric disintegrated into ash against my skin, stripped away by a wind that was not made of air, but of pure radioactive soul fire. I opened my eyes. I had to. You cannot close your eyes to the sun when you are standing inside it. I saw him. I saw the Golden Throne. It wasn't a chair or a machine. It was a wound in reality, a tearing hole in the fabric of the universe from which poured a torrent of golden agony so bright it had no color. It was a light that didn't illuminate. It unmade. It washed over me, through me, screaming with the voices of all the psychers who had burned to keep it lit. It wasn't a blessing. It was an incineration. The fire didn't stop at my skin. It poured into my ears, my mouth, my nose. It flooded the corridors of my mind, hunting for anything that was soft, anything that was human. I felt it hit my memories like a physical wave of heat. I tried to hold on to them, but they were paper in a furnace. I saw my mother's face smiling in the sunlight, and then she curled up and blackened into ash. I saw the river behind my house, the cool blue water, and it boiled away into dry steam. I reached for the memory of the stone, my anchor, my last piece of self. The golden fire found it. It cracked. It crumbled. It was dust. I was burning alive, not just in body, but in history. I was being hollowed out by the sheer indifference of a god. Then came the pain that eclipsed all others. My eyes. My physical eyes. They couldn't withstand the glory. I felt the fluid within them boil. I felt the pressure build, a terrible expanding heat behind the eyelids. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound was swallowed instantly by the roar. I was screaming into a hurricane. I felt a wet, hot sensation running down my cheeks. It wasn't tears. It was me. My sight was melting out of my skull. The smell of cooking meat, my meat, filled my nose, choking me. I clawed at the floor, my fingernails breaking on the stone, trying to crawl away, trying to die, trying to do anything but be here, in his light be cleansed. A priest chanted somewhere far away, his voice, a mosquito buzzing against a thunderclap. In his fire, be forged. I didn't want to be forged. I wanted to cease. I felt the final tether snap. The connection was made. The mind of the Emperor touched mine. It wasn't a loving embrace. It was the touch of a titan vast and uncomprehending of the ant it was crushing. My mind shattered. The world went white. Then it went silent. The roar cut off. The pain became a distant, throbbing echo. I floated in a void stripped of name, stripped of past, stripped of sight. I saw God, and He was blind. I woke up to the sound of dripping water and the smell of antiseptic. For a moment, I panicked, clawing at my face, expecting to feel the blindfold. But there was no fabric. There was only the rough, puckered landscape of scar tissue where my eyes had been. I was blind. I knew this with a terrible physical certainty. And yet, the room was not dark. It was a chaotic, swirling mess of colors I had no names for. The darkness was loud. It throbbed. I was seeing the room not through lenses of jelly and water, but through the raw, exposed nerve of my soul. The walls were gray shadows, but the people were bonfires. I lay on a metal cot in a long row of shivering bodies. The ward was filled with the low moans of the survivors, but to my new eyes, their pain was visible. It leaked from them like black smoke. But the girl in the cot next to me was different. She wasn't moaning. She was screaming, though her jaw was clamped shut. To my witch sight, she was a pillar of uncontrolled white fire. Her soul had cracked in the Emperor's presence, and now it was venting, burning her up from the inside out. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the spiritual flames licked higher, consuming the faint, flickering outline of who she used to be. She was a candle burning at both ends, destined to melt into nothing. The doors swung open. A proctor entered. To my new sight, he was a void, a cold, disciplined block of blue ice moving through the room. He didn't look at charts. He didn't check pulses. He looked at the lights. He walked straight to the burning girl. There was no pity in his movement, only the efficiency of a gardener pruning a diseased branch. He raised a last pistol. He didn't speak, he didn't offer a prayer. Thud. The sound was muffled wet. The white fire in the next cot vanished, instantly snuffed out like a match in a gale. The screaming stopped. The room seemed to exhale. He turned to me. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt his gaze cold and heavy sweeping over my soul. He was looking for cracks. He was looking for the fire. I held my breath. I thought of the river stone, but the image was ash. I had nothing to hold on to, so I held on to the nothingness. I let myself be empty. I let myself be the hollow reed. After a long, agonizing minute, he lowered the weapon. Stable, he grunted, his voice sounding tinny and distant. The binding held. You are one of us. He moved on to the next cot. I lay back against the thin pillow, listening to the thud, 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 as he moved down the line, culling the ones who burned too bright. I had survived. I was an astropath. But as I lay there, seeing the ghost lights of the dying, I realized the truth. The Alara who clutched a river stone. She was gone. She had burned in the light. All that was left was the vessel. I had survived. But the Alara who clutched a river stone, she was gone. She burned in the light. They moved me to the spire. It is a place high above the clouds where the air is thin and tastes of metal. I do not need to see the walls to know they are covered in circuitry and hex wards. I can feel them. To my new eyes, the room is not a room at all. It is a cage of humming golden light, a Faraday cage for the soul. The master astropath stands before me. To you, she would look like a withered crone draped in heavy robes and cables. To me, she is a collapsing star. Her soul is old, dense, and incredibly cold. She does not speak with a mouth. Her voice enters my mind like a drop of ink in clear water, staining everything it touches. You are not Ilara, she whispers, though her lips do not move. You are a voice. You are his voice. You will fear nothing, for you are nothing. I look at my hands. I cannot see the skin, the scars, or the dirt. I see the energy flowing through them, the faint blue-white lattice of my own nervous system. I flex my fingers. They feel light, empty. For so long, I had clutched that river stone. I had held on to it as if it anchored me to the earth. Now my hands are open. They are ready to receive. The fear of the dark, the claustrophobia that plagued me in the cargo hold, it is gone. How can I fear the dark when I can see the storm? The warp is everywhere. It screams outside the whole of reality. It is a churning ocean of colors that have no name. Violence purples that bruise the mind. Reds that taste of copper. It is beautiful. It is terrifying. And I am the glass that holds it back. The tech priest approaches. I feel the cold void of his machine soul before I hear his servos. He reaches for my neck. With a sharp metallic click, the inhibitor collar is released. It falls to the floor with a heavy clang. For the first time in months, the dampener is gone. The connection is absolute. I gasp as the full weight of the ether rushes in, but I do not break. I am forged now. I am a lighthouse, a single unblinking point of order in a universe of chaos. I am empty. I project the thought, and it rings like a bell in the psychic space. I have no name. I am Astropath 771. My purpose is to listen to the screams of the dying miles and stars away and pass them on to those who will not care. I was no longer cargo. I was no longer an aspirant. I was a weapon, and I was waiting to be aimed. The relay chamber is the heart of the machine. We sit in a circle, 12 of us, linked by cables that feed into the base of our skulls. We are the choir. When the link activates, I lose the edges of myself. I am no longer 771. I am part of a vast, throbbing receiver. We are a satellite dish made of meat and misery pointed at the galactic rim. The air smells of ozone, thick and suffocating, but I don't choke. It is the only air I know how to breathe now. The static builds. It is a pressure in the base of the brain, a rising tide. We wait. We listen. We are silent. Then it comes. A message. It doesn't arrive as words. It arrives as agony. Far away across the gulf of the void, a world is dying. I feel the fire, first a sudden searing heat that wraps around a planet. Then the terror, millions of voices, crying out in unison as the atmosphere ignites. In the training hall, this would have broken me. I would have wept for the blue doll. I would have remembered the river. But I am not that girl anymore. I do not build a wall. I do not try to shield. I let the horror in. I let the death of 1 billion souls wash through me like water through a pipe. I feel their pain, but it is data. It is coordinates. It is a tactical update. My mouth opens. It is not my voice that speaks. It is a layered harmonic drone, a chorus of the dead speaking through a living throat. Message received, I intone the words vibrating in my chest. Sector Cadia. The pylons. Fail. The storm. Expands. Requesting. Reinforcement. The Master Astropath acknowledges the signal. She sends it up the chain. The connection severs. The pain vanishes, leaving only the cold, hollow ache of the void. I sit back in the chair. I am shaking, but I'm not crying. I am a wire. A wire does not weep for the electricity that burns it. I kept cleaning the pistol of my mind. There was nothing else to do. They took my eyes, so I could finally see the dark. And the dark is all there is.